Hello everyone! So on my recent European travels to the World Jigsaw Puzzle Championships in Spain, if you were following my travel logs, you will know that after that I ended up in Germany at Ravensburg, which is the home of Ravensburger. There was a special visit arranged to the Ravensburger headquarters where we got to see the factory and the archives. Because most of the activities in the factory are considered trade secrets, I wasn't allowed to include it in the travel logs. However, this is the video where I get to show you the footage that has been approved for sharing. So we started the day in the lobby of their office building. They only had moved into there recently. The first floor has an amazing array of shelves displaying many of their new releases. On one of the upper floors around the atrium, there was a display of the 40,320-piece puzzle that I have been working on. So before they let us into the factory, they gave everyone these bright yellow vests that said Besucher, at least that's how Google pronounces it, on it, which means visitor in German. Then after that, they allowed us into the factory proper. The first thing we got to see was a display showing the corporate history of Ravensburger and its various brands. Did you know that Think Fun and Brio were all Ravensburger brands? So of course the first thing we got to see was the printing press room. It was huge! It sort of reminded me of the scene in Catch Me If You Can, where Tom Hanks catches Leonardo DiCaprio in a giant printing press rooms and paper is flying all over the place. Well, there was no paper flying around the room in Ravensburger, but there were sheets flying through the press at about thousands per hour. It was amazing to see the paper whooshing through the press and to smell the ink. It was printing components for a board game while we were there. But there were stacks and stacks of prints to be made into new puzzles, probably including some unreleased ones, so I didn't take any photos or videos while we were there. You just have to use your imagination. Because they're printing in such huge quantities, they use offset printing, which uses these huge aluminum sheets. They print the image sheets, but they don't immediately turn them into jigsaws, because it takes up a lot less space to store sheets rather than jigsaws. We got to see the gluing machine where the images were glued to the familiar blue cardboard. A little known fact is that that cardboard all comes from the nearby Black Forest in Germany. I love that they're essentially using local materials. The next step was cutting. There are gigantic cutting machines which then bag and seal the puzzles and drop them in a gigantic box. A while back, I got to visit the Oakland Puzzle Company, which is essentially a one-man puzzle factory. We ran the die cutting machine by hand, and I got to see the die with the steel blades and the ejection foam or rubber. Ravensburger essentially does the same thing, except that they do it on an industrial scale. And the quality of a Ravensburger puzzle is so good because they cut every puzzle singly. They did tell us that they have one single employee who draws all the dies by hand, but they have a few different die makers that follow the drawn die and bend the steel blades to make the die by hand. It is in this stage that variation comes into play. They told us that the die maker's girlfriends enjoy doing jigsaw puzzles. The die maker can tell by looking at the puzzle whether the die was made by them or one of their colleagues. I recently did a bunch of the Scandinavian Places puzzles all in a row, so I had 3 of them stacked on my table at the same time. I noticed that 2 of them had interchangeable pieces, while the third did not. My theory is that the dies all came from the same design, but because the dies were made by hand by different people, and the puzzles were cut by different dies, they weren't completely interchangeable. The 2 puzzles with interchangeable pieces were probably cut with the same die, maybe even on the same day. So after that, we moved on to the box production area. We saw how the corners are cut off the printed sheets and off the cardboard. Then the cardboard is folded by a machine, tape is applied to the corners, and the image is glued on. In previous years, when we come back from Spain, we used to have to collapse the boxes so that we could fit more of them to the service. I was always surprised how easily the boxes came apart. Turns out it's because the paper tape in the corner is the weak point. Little things you discover when you destroy your boxes. The last step is getting the box filled, and apparently this is done by hand because the bag of puzzle pieces needs to be distributed properly inside the box. The lid is put on by a very gentle robot though. One interesting thing I learned, even though UK Ravensburger puzzles, for example, include a poster or info sheet, and the US ones don't, they're all made at the same factory. Maybe if you want a poster, you just have to write to Ravensburger and let them know that people in the US really want those posters. The thing that also surprised me that all the puzzles were made in Ravensburger, Ravensburg doesn't even have an airport. Just many, many trucks leaving the factory. So finally, after all the boxes are closed and stacked on pallets by a robot, they're wrapped up in plastic and sent to this huge warehouse. It was huge, cavernous, echoey. There was a robot moving up and down the aisle to move pallets in and out. And all I wanted to do was just stay in there forever and do puzzles. The light wasn't that good though. As a final treat, we got to see how the my Ravensburger puzzles were made. And this was surprising because it was completely different from the earlier process that we were shown. Because for my Ravensburger, the puzzles are pre-cut and they're blank, and then the printer prints the image on them. So at the beginning of the tour, before we received our vests, we had taken a group photo. But by the time we arrived at the my Ravensburger part of the factory, they had started production of a puzzle as a gift for us. So I got to see the printer actually printing this puzzle directly onto the puzzle pieces. So that was the factory visit. After that, we got to visit the Ravensburger archives, which is just as awesome as you can imagine. All the history of the games and puzzles on the shelves. Our host had prepared a wonderful selection of items to show us, starting with the patience game that's considered the first puzzle.
You could say it's the first Ravensburger puzzle. These games weren't called puzzles yet, though. They were called Geduldsspiel, so like patience game, basically. There to test your patience. And here you have exactly this, what I was talking about earlier. This is just actually a prototype thing. By this point, so again, 1891, it wasn't made on wood anymore, but as you can see, on cardboard. And you have these pieces. You see that they're not really exact and stuff like this, so you can do it, and you can take them out and piece them back together. It's very like old school, like the thing started with the difference that it's not made on wood anymore, but on cardboard.
I'd never seen it before, and since then I saw another version in the Ravensburger Museum. Everyone spent most of the time in the archives nerding out, I think, asking questions of the curator, looking at the milestone puzzles that she had laid out for us. She even brought out some of the really big puzzles for us to see, including the Keith Haring, the 40,000 piece Disney puzzle, and my personal unicorn, 18,000 piece Star Wars puzzle. That was a fun visit. We were supposed to visit the Ravensburger Museum that day, but because all of us kept asking questions during the whole visit, we ran out of time. So we just got a quick city tour, and then we had a traditional German dinner, and that concluded my Ravensburger day. Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing about it. Do subscribe, and till next time, happy puzzling!